Salam sejahtera, anda bersama saya Nina Rozman dan ini Niaga Awani. Saya mulakan dengan perkembangan pertama di mana Khazanah Nasional Berhad Khazanah mencatat keuntungan operasi sebanyak 5.1 bilion ringgit bagi tahun kewangan 2024 berbanding 5.9 bilion ringgit pada 2023. Bagaimanapun nilai aset bersih syarikat mencatatkan peningkatan ketara kepada 103.6 bilion ringgit, meningkat sebanyak 18.8 bilion ringgit berbanding tahun sebelumnya. Pengarah Urusan Khazanah Dato' Amirul Faisal Wan Zahir dalam taklimat media tinjauan tahunan Khazanah 2025 menyatakan bahawa prestasi kukuh pada 2024 didorong oleh peningkatan nilai pelaburan dalam pasaran domestik serta pemulihan dalam pasaran global. Selain itu, pulangan berwajaran masa TWRR NAV meningkat kepada 24.6% berbanding 5.7% pada 2023. Dalam pada itu, Khazanah turut mengumumkan dividen 1 bilion ringgit kepada kerajaan Malaysia, menjadikan jumlah terkumpul 19.1 bilion ringgit sejak 2004. Tambah beliau, Khazanah akan terus melaksanakan strategi memajukan Malaysia dengan tumpuan kepada pelaburan mampan dan penciptaan nilai jangka panjang.
Our profit for the year is 5.1 billion, right, which is actually a large number. And that came from a steady income from dividends. We also maintain a very active and disciplined monetization strategy, capitalizing on favorable markets. And we also had some value gains from our public market portfolio. Our dividends, we continue paying dividends. Last year we paid 1 billion. There was additional taxes and also various contributions to the government by other means as well. Our balance sheet remains healthy.
Sementara itu, Ketua Pegawai Pelaburan Khazanah Datuk Hisham Hamdan berkata portfolio dana kekayaan berdaulat itu akan memastikan nisbah pelaburannya kekal melebihi 60% di Malaysia. Pihaknya juga akan sentiasa memantau dan mengimbangi semua portfolio pelaburan dengan sewajarnya untuk mencapai pulangan optimum berdasarkan pendedahan risiko semasa.
One thing, if you look at our numbers, we are pretty much heavily concentrated in Malaysia. And still about the bulk of it, 60+%. So we will constantly rebalance in terms of investment, and the ratio is still to maintain slightly over 60% in Malaysia. So, I mean, the last few years, developed market has done really well, and last year, Malaysia did really well. So something that we constantly will continue to monitor and will rebalance accordingly in order to get an optimal return given whatever risk exposure that we want.
Khazanah Nasional Berhad menjangkakan tahun 2025 menjadi tahun mencabar bagi ekonomi global dengan ketidaktentuan dasar Amerika Syarikat di bawah pentadbiran baharu yang berpotensi meningkatkan tekanan inflasi serta ketegangan geopolitik. Sehubungan itu, pengarah urusannya Dato' Amirul Faisal Wan Zahir menggariskan strategi untuk berdepan persekitaran yang lebih tidak menentu dengan menumpukan kepada pelaburan jangka panjang dan juga inovasi.
The US policies has a big impact on the rest of the world. With Trump coming in, you can hear his policies of low energy, low taxes, and also favoring the domestic businesses. It's actually quite inflationary, meaning to say that our view is we're likely to see rates higher for longer, given the policies that they have.
Bagaimanapun, Amirul Faisal berkata di sebalik cabaran ini, Malaysia masih berada dalam kedudukan yang agak seimbang dari segi perdagangan antarabangsa.
China makes up 14% of our exports, so it does impact us. But US makes up 12% of our exports, so that is also something. So we're actually pretty balanced as a nation when it comes to both. The other thing is we see a lot of investments. Not just foreign direct investments which are happening, not just being committed, but are actually happening, but you also have domestic investments. You'll see more of the funds playing a role for domestic investments as well.
Selain itu, penggunaan domestik yang stabil memberikan sedikit kelebihan kepada ekonomi Malaysia. Justru beliau menekankan kepentingan kesan dengan meningkatkan produktiviti dan inovasi bagi memanfaatkan perubahan ini. Dengan ketidaktentuan global yang berterusan, khazanah melihat kepentingan memastikan daya tahan ekonomi negara dengan strategi pelaburan yang mampan dan berdaya saing dalam tempoh jangka panjang.
And this segment, we're going to be focusing on tax, where previously reported a total of 7,900 companies have adopted the e-invoice system, involving 87 million issuance overall as of November 19, says the Finance Minister. Datuk Sri Anwar Ibrahim said that it also involved the voluntary participation of companies from the second and third phases of the e-invoice implementation. Businesses have until February 7 to rectify any e-invoicing compliance issue without facing penalties. Failure to address this within the next 5 working days may result in fines of up to 20,000 ringgit per violation. And that also serves as a timely reminder from our guest currently in the studio with us is Tanis Khana, Executive Director of Tratex dan Berhad. I want to say thank you very much, Tanis, for joining me. There's one day to go. Why, and tomorrow is the 7th February. And why is this day is an important date for e-invoicing compliance? Share with us.
Thank you, Nina. Have you realized last month, January, when you go shopping, buy things, some businesses could have given you an e-invoice. Some might have just given you a normal invoice. Even when you ask them for an e-invoice, they might have said, no, this is the normal invoice. We are not obliged to give you an e-invoice yet. Now, a lot of these businesses may have turnover more than 25 million ringgit, which means they are already in the e-invoicing regime. But when they are in the e-invoicing regime, they can do two things. One, they could issue an e-invoice to you, which means they collect your data, they collect your IC number, TIN, and so on. TIN is a taxpayer identification number. Submit this to LHDN, get a validation, and give you an e-invoice. That's one option they have. The other is they give you a normal receipt or bill or whatever, and then come to the end of the month. So for all the transaction in January, by 7th of February, they then lodge the total figure with LHDN. We call it consolidated e-invoice. So consolidated e-invoice is not a two-party document. It's actually a total sales that comprises of many different customers. You add it together and you lodge with LHDN. So two groups of businesses, one who may not have been fully ready, they might have issued normal invoices and all that, so they have to do the compliance by tomorrow, which is 7th of February, for all the transactions in January. And the other group is businesses may have well intended to do the compliance, to do e-invoice for every single transaction in January. But now with hindsight, they may have realized some transaction could have been missed out because of system issues, because of incomplete data or whatnot. And those compliance gap, you can issue a consolidated e-invoice by tomorrow on an aggregate basis, 7th of February, on an aggregate basis, and it will be completely penalty-free for all the transactions in January where there was no transactional e-invoice issued. So that's the significance of 7th February.
All right, this is a very quite big day for businesses, people especially. And for those group or people, we can say businesses that are not completely ready, or maybe we can say still lost, are there any grace periods or extension available after 7th February?
So 7th February in a way is it's already a grace period, so to speak, because this was announced in 2023 and we had 3 phases of implementation. First phase for 100 million for the larger, 1st August for 100 million and above entities turnover. Then for companies with turnover 25 million to 100 million, it is 1st January, which was last month, 1st January 2025. For companies below 25 million, it's 1st July 2025. So it's already phased in that sense. Further, there is a 6 months leniency period given.
Okay.
So for even businesses 25 to 100 million, for transactions from 1st of January until 31st of July, for all this transaction, they are allowed to do consolidated e-invoice on a relaxed basis. Relaxed basis as in they don't have to quote the original invoice number and so on when they do the consolidated e-invoice. But it's very important to them for them to do it on monthly basis.
Okay.
So you do not wait to collect all the transaction from January to July and do it in August. That would be clearly wrong. So IRB has made it very clear this leniency, penalty-free applies provided you do consolidated e-invoice on monthly basis. So if you're above 25 million for all the transaction in January, you must do the consolidated e-invoice by tomorrow, 7th of February. That is a must.
Wow. Probably they might have taken, is it enough time for me? And probably, there's already, as you mentioned, this is already a grace period, as it was mentioned during the year of 2023, and it was implemented during a few phases. And what specific steps should businesses immediately take to ensure they fulfill the compliance by the deadline?
So affected businesses, I mean 25 million is a decent size, so affected businesses might have already done the go live and might have said in January, okay, we are e-invoice ready, but now is a good time to have a final check, try to tally back your P&L figures with the e-invoice figures to see if there's any gap. Because if you have any gap, then you still have a few more hours left to correct it. So why miss that final opportunity?
And you also share or maybe elaborate further on the consolidated e-invoice. But how can businesses transition from normal e-invoice to consolidated invoice? What are their benefits in this within 24 hours? How can we catch and highlight the benefits?
Okay, so when we talk about consolidated e-invoice, actually e-invoice is not only on the sales transaction. E-invoice also applies on a number of other transactions. Good examples are, say for example, if you pay an individual, the company pays an individual. Let's say for example, AWANI pays me a fee for speaking today, for example, then what AWANI would have to do is to issue a self-bill e-invoice so that even if tomorrow I forget to declare this income in my personal tax return, IRB knows about it and they can remind me to include in that declaration and pay tax on it.
Oh, okay.
Okay, so those kind of things are also for January. If you have not done it, you can do it by 7th February. So it's not only on the sales. For a company, they also look at the what we call as a self-bill e-invoice implication on some of the payments and expenses that were incurred or paid in January.
Is there any challenges or limitations when, probably we can say, when using consolidated e-invoice?
I think, there are challenges on routine consolidated e-invoice. One of the biggest challenges, you have to trace back all the underlying document number. But during the initial 6 months period, that challenge has been relaxed. So you don't actually have to do that for the first 6 months. So for company with 2,500 million ringgit, for the consolidated e-invoice, they submit in February, March, April, May, June, July, 7th of July. They don't have to track and mention the underlying document number. So in that sense, that major challenge is already addressed by LHDN. But there are also other aspects. For example, if there are credit notes and so on, you must remember to separate them out and issue a e-credit note for it rather than issuing a consolidated e-invoice on the net amount. So those nitty-gritty, of course, to a certain extent, businesses must do their due diligence.
And how can businesses ensure they are covering all the relevant transactions to meet the e-invoicing requirements, or is it only important to sales transaction? What about other kind of transaction?
Okay, that's a very important question because the common mindset out there, especially among those who are not very well prepared, particularly below the 25 million who are trying to prepare for the July deadline, say, okay, we get a software, we look at our current invoices and how to convert all of our current invoices into e-invoices. Well, that's a good starting point, but that cannot be your entire e-invoicing implementation strategy.
Okay.
You need to have a transactional impact assessment done looking at what are the transactions for which currently you're not issuing any kind of invoice, but you may be required to issue an e-invoice based on your implementation date. That's a very important question the companies must ask, and the answer to that lies in a transaction impact assessment. Now, sometimes counterintuitively, there can also be situations where currently you're issuing an invoice, but moving forward, you can't issue an invoice anymore because of specific e-invoice regulation. Okay. And sometimes some of the intercompany charges, the debit notes, you may have to convert it into e-invoice. So you have to look at it holistically. Converting your billing system into e-invoicing compliance is a good starting point, but that cannot be your sole goal of that implementation project.
And I want to check, for this, is it the same as 7th of March? Businesses require to take different actions, meet certain standards for the March 7 deadline compared to tomorrow? Okay,
so the difference between, is that for businesses above 100 million, their 6 months period expire on 31st January. So they can still enjoy the the relaxations for 7 February, but that wouldn't be available for 7 March anymore. So that's for the larger businesses.
Okay.
When it comes to 25 million to 100 million category, these businesses, what they have to do on 7th of March is quite similar to 7th of February, except they have one more extra thing to do.
Okay.
So what's that one more extra thing? So during the month of January, if you had importation of goods, or you had payments to foreigners for services, you have to do what we call as a self-bill e-invoice to capture the expense. By right, you're supposed to do that by 28th of February, which is the last day of February, last day of the following month, with the respective vendors' details. But during the 6 months leniency period, we allow you to do a consolidated self-bill e-invoice by 7th of March for all the importations in January. So likewise, for transactions in February, for your sales transaction, payments to individual and all in February, you have to do a self-bill e-invoice, or sorry, consolidated self-bill e-invoice or consolidated normal e-invoice by 7th of March. But for importations in February, you will do it by 7th of April. Okay. So there's a further month there.
But for 7th February, what is the consequences for not complying?
Well, as with anything with e-invoicing, the penalty ranges from 200 to 20,000 ringgit. But let's try not to go there.
Okay, all right. Probably my last question, what should businesses below 25 million ringgit annual sales do in preparation for compliance by 1st July this year?
Okay, so first, there are a lot of resources in LHN website. You can get familiar with it. You have to look at the compliance strategy. Are you going to upgrade your software and so on? Put together a project team. Finance may not be able to handle it alone. Neither can operation handle it alone. You might need a multidisciplinary project team, depending on the size. Actually, more depending on the complexity rather than the size of the organization. Sometimes the organization can be small but complex with a lot of importation using free zones, bonded warehouse and all that. Then you need a real multidisciplinary team to properly study the transactions and determine the e-invoice impact. So don't leave it all to finance. It might take a whole of the entity approach, and put together a project team in advance, and do not assume e-invoice is only about your sale transaction. That would be a very costly mistake. E-invoice affects different level of transactions within a company, even a payment of incentive, payment to individual, importation. It affects many aspects, not just the sales invoicing.
And for that, we hope this is just a reminder for every businesses out there. Make sure to fulfill compliance by 7th February, which is tomorrow. Again, I want to say thank you very much to our guest, Nishkana, the Executive Director at Tratex Sedang Berhad. Hope to see you again in the future.
Thank you.
And definitely all of our discussion here will be featured in AstroAwani.com across all social media platforms. All right, next we'll be focusing on the aged care and senior living sector in Malaysia is rapidly evolving due to the country's aging population and increasing demand for specialized care. The percentage of Malaysians aged 65 and above is projected to rise from 8.1% in 2024 to 14.5% by 2040, with over 23% of the population expected to be aged 60 and above by 2050. Integrated retirement villages are becoming popular, offering a community-oriented lifestyle with elderly-friendly designs, meal planning, housekeeping, medical checkups, therapy, and social activities. And to help us understand the key trends in aged care and senior living in Malaysia, I welcome you, our guest, Sulaiman Zahir, Director Research of Rahim & Co. International Sedang Berhad. I would say thank you very much, Rahim, for joining me. Firstly, definitely it's important to talk about aged care and senior living, as Malaysia, a few years, will be becoming an aged nation. Firstly, how has the demand for aged care and senior living facilities evolved in Malaysia? And is the real estate sector adapting fast enough to meet this need?
Good morning, everybody. Thank you for having me again. The aged care sector in Malaysia has gradually and steadily growing over the past few years. And as you have actually highlighted, the percentage share of aged population defined as above 65 years and above. Malaysia was actually defined as an aging society back in 2020, where 7% of the population is already aged 65 years and above. And that percentage is projected to reach above 14% by 2040, whereby by then we would be classified as under WHO, under WHO, as an aged society, no longer an aging society. And even if you were to go even further, super aged society is defined as above 20% of the total population is defined as with an age of above 65. So the growing number of aged society in the country is due to the medical advancement and the healthcare advancement, as well as which leads towards a longer life expectancy, while the birth rate for the country is actually slower, which makes it total net percentage of higher age population. So the growth here, we see that there's a lot of market growth in terms of potential numbers. And this is actually now taken up and slowly being looked at a lot by urban population especially, because the demand for such facilities has actually been promulgated, or basically highlighted by the modern family institution behavior, whereby the children of the elderly societies of the parents and whatnot can't really give full-time care because they're also working. Or they're actually at school for the young adults. So they actually want to put their elderly parents in a proper aged care facility. But looking at that, even there's different ranges. There are different range of aged care facilities, from independent living to assisted living to actually a high care living, a specialized medical facility. And we see the growth of these in the market right now. Like Sunway Sanctuary have actually come up with their aged care facility. We also see in Ipoh there's Green Acres. There were developments in Johor, even in Selangor, and several other states as well. And these are now slowly picked up and being used and being actually accepted by the society. But I have to actually say the structure right now, because of the society, Malaysian society or even Asian society, there's a bit of a stigma, if you like, when people talk about sending their parents to a aged care facility or retirement home. But this is actually different, because that's senior living versus retirement living. It ranges for a wide range of spectrum.
All right, as you mentioned, mostly in the demand of the market for this such facility is probably from the background or demand from the modern family behavior, and there's a few range of this facility or the services. And as you mentioned also, there's the perception that aged care residents in Malaysia cater more to high-income groups. Moving forward, how can we ensure more affordable options without compromising quality care and wellness services?
The provision of aged care facility that is very supportive to all aspects of all strata of societies would depend on one, I guess, in terms of the business model, and in the implementation of it to make it more efficient, as well as one of the key factors here is the setup cost. So government incentives and government tax incentives, grants, and support is actually needed. And in terms of the facilities that are provided within those facilities, it is going to be equipped with medical link, telelink services to actually help support the occupants, the elderly occupants, or the aged society occupants over there. But on top of that, the supply of skilled workers for aged care is also a concern. Because right now, the number is actually, there are a lot of all these skilled workers, but they're not really fully utilized right now. They're still stuck or basically attached to a proper hospital or medical facility, but the kind of daycare facility, or basically, because it ranges from a registered nurse or a doctor down to just a caretaker. So those kind of mindset and also the wage involved for those kind of manpower would actually contribute towards the total cost of running a facility. Because right now, typically, range for an aged care facility in Klang Valley, at least, it starts from around 5,000 ringgit per month. Typically about 6,000 to 8,000 ringgit a month, and that's quite hefty. That is quite hefty for just a person to actually be placed over there, and hence that's why it's inclined towards the higher income group who can actually afford to actually go into those facilities. But this is where the community-based aged care framework, which is also designed to be to allow the aged society to age in place, which is basically for them to grow older or age within their own premises, with the support of daycare facilities or pay-as-you-use facilities or pay-as-you-use services when you actually order.
As you mentioned that for every community we need to have at least a community-based framework, as this is also one of the most critical design elements that future aged care and senior living residents must incorporate to ensure long-term sustainability and functionality. As we compare right now, for maybe when we're young, we need a bit more of the look and design and feel a bit more aesthetic, but when we're a bit older, probably we are more prominent towards comfortability. And as you mentioned that to set up, of course, a facility must be efficient, and it's very important that we have the government fund initiative, grant and support. And from also the government side, we want to take a look at what some of very important policies or incentives should the government introduce to encourage more integrated residential project with aged care and wellness components, like you also just share right now, the community-based framework. What else can we take a look at?
One good thing that the government has started to look, the Act of the Private Aged Care, Healthcare Facilities Act, have laid down the platform or the framework in terms of the regulation of such facilities or not. Because before this, we do not have that, and that was actually passed in short in 2018. That actually have created a regulatory framework in terms of providing the services. On top of that, in terms of getting funding in, or even linkages with the insurance companies, or even the Bantuan Rakyat, there was actually some schemes by the government to actually give grants to the retirees. These are the facilities that can actually support the affordability side of things. But in doing that, even the design for private aged care facilities has to comply with a lot of things. The universal design, as actually highlighted also, the things that you put priorities when you are more youthful and more independent and agile in your mobility is different to those within this society, within this age group. Because safety and security is going to be very important, because they are no longer as responsive in terms of if an emergency actually happened. But on top of that, the quality of living whereby mental health within the age society has to be given a lot of emphasis, because this is where the community support is very important, not just from the family, from the surrounding, and the community that it actually engage within. These kind of support in terms of activities, in terms of facilities for them to actually enjoy. Because right now, even today, when we talk about, in the past we talked about life begins at 40, if somebody would actually refer to that. Some actually argue today's 40 is already at the age of 60. 60 is the new 40 to some extent, because a lot of people are still, we have actually aged. There's a lot more people within the age group, retirees group, who are still very active, and they are still contributing to the economy as well. You can see them playing in a SME role or small business role, or even some consulting work after retirement. So this is where that whole aged care should be designed as a community base, and it's supported by not just the government, but also from the family members, obviously, but the whole community and the healthcare support that's actually needed to actually move forward. And hence, this is also going to actually help making Malaysia a desired destination to retire in, coupling with our medical tourism angle as well as our MM2H.
All right, as you mentioned, and we are at the end of our segment. Again, I would say thank you very much, Sulaiman Sahir, Director Research of Rahim & Co. International Sedang Berhad. As we reaching or heading to aging nation, it's important to look at all of the aspects that you have just shared, that even though we have a very good policy to ensure a very well managed ecosystem for all the community, especially the senior citizen, but we need all the supports from everyone across a sector, agency and the government to help boost this residential area, where the place where we reside at the end. Again, I say thank you very much, and definitely all of our discussion here will be featured in AstroAwani.com across all social media platforms. Stay tuned, as we'll be taking a short break, and my colleague Ibrahim Sani will be taking over right after this.
Di dalam setiap berita yang dibawa, konteks amat penting. Cara kita mendapat berita kian berubah. Melalui media sosial maupun saluran digital yang lain serta kaca TV. Kami sentiasa membawakan yang tergempar dan terkini.
Kita ni buat sesuatu yang berbeza.
Teraskan acuan verifikasi yang diamalkan supaya setiap fakta adalah sahih. Daripada analisis pelbagai sudut yang mendalam, laporan-laporan khas dan perbincangan yang membina negara. Inklusif, suara rakyat kami ajukan. Keseimbangan persepsi kami pastikan. Kerana setiap cerita mempunyai impak yang tersendiri dan perlu dibawa dengan penelitian yang terperinci. Pastikan Astro Awani menjadi pilihan anda, tidak kira di mana sahaja anda berada. Saluran berita paling dipercayai di Malaysia.
Thanks for joining us. This is The Economy. I'm your host, Ibrahim Sani. In the studio with me is a friend of mine, of course, a friend of the show as well, Lee Hock An. He's a senior fellow as well as the coordinator for the Malaysia Studies Program at ISEAS Yusof Institute, here in town for the Chinese New Year, of course, I presume.
Well, back in town for a second Chinese New Year.
Second Chinese New Year. Chinese New Year doesn't end until the next Chinese New Year. Yeah. Of course, Hock An, you have recently published the most recent paper, which is calling for the transformation plan for the Bumiputera 2035 roadmap, or the Putra 35. To have a little bit more clarity and focus, why don't you take us from the top in terms of what is the paper talking about, especially some of the nuances that you're trying to flesh out from the particular study of yours?
Yeah, okay. Thanks so much, Ibrahim, and it's a pleasure to be on this show and to be in your office.
It's kind of nice, right, this office? I kind of like doing the show in the office right now because it's a little bit more cozier and a little bit more less intimidating than the studio. Yeah. Or at least in my impression, because with the studio you have all the lights and everything drowning you, and I might not get the best out of the guest.
Yeah, no, I mean, sure, it's a pretty comfortable seat. I hope it doesn't get too hot.
No lah.
Yeah. Well, so yeah, this recent paper, I mean, it's, you know, and a series of a lot of writings I've done on the subject over time, but this was specifically responding to the policy discourses of the last year. I mean, it's starting with the Bumiputera Economic Congress, and then, of course, that was sort of a precursor to the economic transformation plan, right? And so I think it begins as well, you know, with some of the policy pronouncements that were leading up to that. And I think one of the aspects that I found, I highlighted in the paper, you know, is, well, in a way it's kind of a lament, it's also a bit of a plea, right? That on this subject, you know, could we just be a bit more honest, be a bit more candid about what the policies are, you know, what are the implications? There are beneficiary groups, and then there are people who are excluded as well, right? And really just have a more open, you know, conversation that is acknowledging the different interests of the different groups, and really striving, I think, for, and the three themes I put there, right? For it to be fair, for it to be rigorous, and self-awareness. So I'm touching a bit more on the self-awareness part, because it was part of some of the speeches from PM Anwar, Deputy PM Zahid as well, where it's this common refrain that we've actually heard for about almost 50, since the NEP, 50 plus years, where they are basically, I mean, it's giving an assurance. It is making a certain statement that is true, but it's only part of something that is bigger. The statement is that, we help the poor of all races. Now, this is really the first prong, right, of the NEP. Eradicating poverty irrespective of race. But the way that it was brought up in the past year, in 2 speeches by PM and DPM, was really to say to those who may have reservations, may have grievances, may have objections, right, to something like the Bumiputera policy, which is to say that you're taken care of. But they are referring to, when they say you're taken care of, they're referring to helping the poor of all races. And they were even bringing out data to show that. Now, I'm not denying that is true. In fact, yes, it has all along, right, something that Malaysia has done. A lot of assistance, and increasingly, I think, with cash transfers in the last 10, 15 years, they showed the data for that. Yes, it goes to Indian households, Chinese households, right, Malay Bumiputera and non-Malay Bumiputera. But that is one thing. It is one policy domain, but it doesn't really have anything to do with, it overlaps, but it's very distinct from the other policy domain, which is related to Bumiputera policies. And Bumiputera policies, especially where I think they become more contentious, is in higher education. I mean, that's the sphere that you're actually working with. Yes. Although a bit, not so much, because it's more the higher education admissions.
Yes and no. Yeah. But go on.
Yeah. So you say helping the poor of all races, it doesn't affect the reality. It doesn't provide any assurance about the fairness or the unfairness that people would feel, right, in terms of education admissions. So that's again coming back to the first point. Can we please just say things as they are? That policies that are intervening, where it's targeting a certain group to promote their participation in especially areas like higher education, in small business loans, in wealth ownership, right, where it's about participation, it's about expanding capability and so on, and competitiveness. They intervene in areas where there are trade-offs. If you give preferential access to one group, it does come at the expense of other groups, right? And we just want. I just hope that we can be clear about that. Even if we target B40, which seemingly everyone embraces. I mean, I think really everyone is on board with something like that, right? If you give, preference to B40, getting B40 preferential entry is also going to come at the expense of others, right? So I think maybe the sort of a bit of a caricature case, but I think it's not. It's a fair generalization, right? That you have, non-Malay, like Chinese or Indian students who are not getting into admissions as they think they should, and they believe that Bumiputera students with lesser grades are being given priority, and those Bumiputera students get in, and these Chinese and Indian don't get in, right? I think that is something that we need to kind of resolve, and I think just to acknowledge that that is a legitimate, grievance that some people fare. But sometimes, we can be overzealous, right, in embracing things that are pro-poor, pro-B40, because in one instance, without thinking about the consequences, in the first instance, you have Bumiputera students getting in, and let's be clear, getting in on a preferential basis means that you are allowed permitted entry with less qualifications than others, because that is the policy. It is recognizing that we're trying to redress a certain inequality, right? So there are others who are being excluded. But in one case, it's Bumiputera students getting in. In the other case, B40 students are getting in, also at the expense of some others, of maybe also some non-Malay students, right? So I'm just bringing this up, right, to say that the interventions of in this area, it is really quite messy, and we shouldn't try to oversimplify them. Also to believe that just helping the poor is resolving the problem, or just making it fully meritocratic is solving the problem. And I try to say that it's really about trying to get a balance of selection process, right? That recognizes the importance of qualifications and merit and pursuit excellence. We have some scope for providing for, preferential entry for the disadvantaged because they don't have, because of their disadvantaged background, right? That's not really at the level playing field. We allow for that, and we also allow for equitable group representation as a criteria. And these three are not entirely in conflict, but we need to find a way to have a balance of those three.
Do you think that the Putra 35 framework allows for this balance to be achieved, though? Because while you elucidate some of the ideas in your recent paper, the kind of objectives of what Putra 35 is all about, for instance, some of the key KPIs today were like this in terms of house median income versus non-Bumiputra and so on and so on. And then you talk about this whole element of needs-based, say for instance, the university education entry process, for instance. Do you feel that that balance can be achieved by having something like this, the Putra 35 framework? And you also make note that there are non-Bumiputra representatives in the Bumiputera Economic Council, but I note the verb that you used, or the adjective that you used, token. And I have to agree. I mean, it is what it is, right? So I'm getting a sense that you're saying that Putra 35 is not going to achieve that kind of balance of needs-based versus some of the preferential treatment towards strong race.
Well, I mean, Putra 35 on its own, by definition, is not striving for the balance because it is the one plan that is targeted at one group. So to answer that question, I think we need to pan out a little bit because there are programs that are targeted at other groups as well. I mean, much smaller scale, but for the Orang Asli, for the Indian community in microfinance, in higher education admissions as well. A lot of these are not really widely known, and they are a much lesser scale. But that is the point I'm trying to make, that the conversation, I think, is much more constructive. It's much more conciliatory. It's much more engaging. And mutually empathetic when groups can actually say that, look, can we find a way for this system that can target different groups to work better in concert? But
real politics does apply.
Yeah.
We're looking at this administration not winning the Malay seats. And UMNO has lost a sizable amount. They are the smallest that they have ever in terms of share of voice in the parliament. And PH, if you think about it, the Amanah 8 seats that PH has won mostly are in non-majority Malay seats. PKR, they have about 30, only 20 of them can be classified as Bumiputra or more majority Malay seats. They're not getting the Malay votes, generally speaking.
Yeah.
And on the other side, they are getting all the Malay votes with Bersatu and PAS collectively. Nearly all of their seats are Malay majority. But then you have to think about Bumiputera as a policy does affect the 40, 50 seats that are in Sabah Sarawak as well. So I cannot imagine it is in the interest of this administration to not have something that is of preferential policy base in order for them to continue to stay in power. So I don't know how you're going to reconcile this whole blue sky theory that you're trying to push versus the real politics situation. How do you see that?
But I'm precisely saying that the discourse should move away from this sort of the head-on clash between abolishing versus preserving, and here's the thing as well, right? If Pakatan Harapan says, let us do need-based policy, it will freak out, right? It really makes, I think, Malays jittery because that is a code for taking away these Malay policies. We can hear UMNO people saying need-based, and it doesn't have the same effect, right? So you're right to point out the politics
who
of it.
says it is more important.
Yeah.
I can say the same thing versus you can say the same thing.
But they don't know what to say anymore because, it's been 15 years, right? It's trumpeting this sort of need-based instead of race-based.
Yeah.
And it's never translated anything practical because I don't think it really is logically sound or practically feasible because they're not conflicting. It's not one or the other.
Yeah.
No, I think that they cannot, right? It politically and in every way. Practically, it's not something that you can just dismantle.
Yeah.
And my point is that we don't just treat it as though it's like some kind of cancer that needs to be taken away. But of course, there are parts that need to be modified and made more effective, but actually make a case building up from what our policy objective is, what are the which are the target groups, and make it actually more effective. So I don't see what's the harm in actually articulating that, saying that we are fully for. In fact, this is where I think Pakatan trips themselves up, right? They feel that, oh, if we are too overt in supporting it, they'll lose the minority base, right? But then they keep saying this need base, which then also alienates the Malay base, because they are Pakatan saying something, and also here's what I'm getting to, related maybe to something like Yayasan. You know, it boggles me, Yayasan Penaraju, right? That 10, 15 years, whatever, you can say since 2008, or maybe even post 2018, right? Pakatan actually winning power. You know, they're not driving the narrative. They're not at the forefront. Like, was there ever, a senior leader that went out, of their own volition and made a very emphatic stance in support of Yayasan Penaraju?
No.
No, right?
I mean,
have they supported? Okay, I mean,
but by virtue of him being chairman today,
True, yeah. I mean, things like, Mara, for instance, and no lack of strategic thinking to say that maybe, what if we support, be strategic in terms of identifying the specific programs where there actually is very, very broad outreach. And I think, the Malay population can have appreciated the benefits, like Giat Mara, many of the TVET programs, right? That are dispersed. How many is it? 300 plus Giat Mara colleges and so on. Whenever Mara comes up, it's in the context of what? UITM.
Yeah.
And it's in the context of non-Malay wanting to get into UITM. So then they're on the back foot lah. And they're not driving it to say that we support Giat Mara. And I don't think that it's really going to be, really, discombobulating their base.
No, actually.
Because the Giat Maras are located away from the centers. You don't have a lot of Indian Chinese saying that, how can you be so gung-ho about Giat Mara? I want my children to get into Giat Mara. But you see, they're not driving it, so they have not really earned, I think, the kind of credence, right? And it only comes up, in a defensive. Once it's in a defensive mode, and they don't really need, they've not said that we will abolish, right? UITM or make open. But whenever the issue comes up, it's like, oh, no, we support. But it's kind of already too late, because you're on the defensive, you're on the back foot, right? So this is what I'm trying to get across, that can we rethink and actually present it in a more, in a constructive way. I'm not saying that we don't be critical, but we actually be critical of the policy in a way that is really systematic. And then we could also pinpoint, right, the concerns about whether it's actually benefiting, let's just use B40, right, as the code. That's apply that more clearly in terms of usually, that it's not about replacing getting rid of Bumiputera policies, but it is ensuring that the policies that are for Bumiputera B40 actually go to Bumiputera B40, right? I mean, I think there's a lot of room to actually make a case that Pakatan Unity Government, they can do better, but they're just not really, devoted their minds towards thinking along those lines and making the case. And then it ends up being like, it's like the policy makes a comeback because UMNO is back in the picture. So now it's like UMNO policy again, and the government as a whole is not really owning it.
So there are two things before I can forward this conversation even further. Number one, organizations like Mara does have a target group specific towards B40 and Bumiputera. Organization like Yayasan Penaraju does not put B40 as a precursor. It never has. It never was mentioned. It was more towards uplifting certain professions into getting them accredited and inducted into the respective professions, such as the Malaysian Institute of Accountants, CFA, some of the chartered technology roles and the like. So it doesn't matter where your income is, it's more of trying to uplift that particular profession. Organizations like Teraju, by the way, you're very familiar, just to let people know, Hok An is very familiar with Teraju, Yayasan Peraju, Mara and the likes. He's been doing this for decades now. It's more to uplift that micro businesses, micro loans. It used to be micro grants or even large grants. Now it's purely loans and P2P, towards getting more Bumiputeras into the space of entrepreneurship and perhaps making them leave their employment status and become business owners and hiring managers themselves. Having said that, these tools are already there, and it's currently being optimized. There's also governance elements that is being put in place, trying to make sure that the money that is allocated at these people get reaching the necessary target groups. Do you feel that the current work that is being done, at least in the Bumiputera space, is enough to say that the government is off to a good start, this administration at least, after 3 years?
Yeah.
Or is it left for one thing as well?
I mean, I think you are bringing up, the ones that I know it's your direct experience, right? It's not just, just self-promotional, but I can also say that what I can see, is there are a few, there is a certain dynamism in the ones that you're bringing up, right? And I think I would certainly be hopeful. I think there's a lot of the potential. I mean, I trace it back to, this is to Teraju, I think, from about 10 years, 15 years ago, 12 years ago, where, I think there was a substantive refocus on entrepreneurship, on, more bottom-up built enterprises. In fact, it was even the focus, right, was on non-GLC vendors, right, outside of that orbit. And it's been a process, I think, of learning and experimenting that goes back about 12 years. So you're talking about, only loans and not grants. That I think also arises from the experiences with the grants, right? So I think we are talking about certain programs and institutions that are more nimble, right? That have shown themselves to be more dynamic. And I think I bring it up in the paper as well, that this is it's a good start, right? I think you would agree that there's probably significant elements of launching out into something that is new, but albeit there's also some continuity.
Yeah.
But I guess where there's a certain gap, because this transformation plan, right, is meant to be national and quite all encompassing, is firstly, and I think this was not really done very well for the last 12 years since Teraju and all that was all the learning, right?
14 years. Yes, Teraju is 13.
Okay, thank you for correcting. Yeah,
no, it's okay.
So,
but you got the range right. That's what I'm trying to say.
Chinese New Year lah, so the thing very mixed up.
No, but you got the range right. You got the range. 12, 13, 14 is about the same.
Yeah. So, sorry, what was I saying? The
gaps.
I mean, okay. I guess I know the answer in the sense that it's politics lah, the territorialism, right? But still, I think the critique stands that so much of this learning, right? How is it translating wider outside of the Teraju stable, right? Teraju, Yayasan, Aquinas, and so on, into others that have much more extensive funding and outreach, especially with Mara. Okay, I mean, there's many people that would need to give the authoritative answer for that.
But this is a philosophical difference between the Ministry of Urban Development versus the Ministry of Economy, and the philosophical schism stems not just from the organizations of these two ministries, also the leadership of these two ministries and the folks and the agencies that behave in these two agencies. And for them to be put together and come out with Putra 35, that in itself is already a feat to be marveled with. But at the same time, there will be inconsistencies in the policy when two different thinkings are put into one paper.
Yeah.
But that's politics.
Yeah.
I mean, it's not just that. I can even pan out and talk about the government.
So
the government is also the same thing.
Yeah, I mean, this is a bit more operationally, how what things have worked, what haven't, and then what you learn, and how they can be spent. I mean, well, from a policy standpoint, I mean, it's something that, is just a natural implication that you draw that, okay, you have learned this, why are others not learning? Obviously, you bring out the politics. But the other one also, I guess, is now what's happening with Ministry of Education now owning this, right?
Yes.
And it's outside of PM's department. And whether it could have sufficient
you were mentioning
authority,
about the auspices of PM's department or PM's office might have that kind of overreach.
Yeah, because it's I mean, the reach would have to be extensive, and it already is in terms of whatever 130 something initiatives. Anyway, I mean, it's a long laundry list, and
nobody can recite back the numbers. I can tell you that.
So this regulating peer ministries, right, and so on. So, I mean, I think this is another case of, I mean, wait and see, but one that, I feel that I have a little bit less confidence that it really
There's no
can be
time
delivered.
to wait and see, Hok An. There's 2027 looms over us. There could be some snap election talks coming up. It can be as soon as after Raya next year. I mean, normally we consult the constellation and see when the election is, but generally speaking, it's just around the corner, so to speak. So is there enough time, especially for this administration to come across and say, you know what, we have enough, we've done enough, and get us re-elected? Or do you feel that there's like seriously a lot of... And then there's of course the opponent, which is also left for one thing in terms of their performance when they were in office. So are we left with a jaded electorate right now and basically same old, same old? None of us are political, I guess, spooks, I suppose, but we are rakyats. We know that this is the situation. Do you feel that, there's going to be a left of jaded situation now for upcoming elections?
I mean, I think, things need to happen. The material benefits, right, need to be felt, and some of this is whether it's disbursing loans, if it's about scholarships, right? And I think the association also needs to be there. I think maybe sometimes, it's not linked up in people's minds that this was part of that program, right? So, yeah, I mean, I'm wait and see, not saying that, there's a lot of time, but in the sense of, it's more now to wait for the evaluation and for the evidence of its rollout.
Final comments as we draw our conversation to a close. The needs-based approach, blue skies right now theory. Where do you see the best way to hit so that we can actually address and be candid about some of the situation right now? Data has shown that intra-race Gini coefficient is rising. The rich Chinese versus the poor Chinese, the rich Indian versus the poor Indian, the rich Malays versus the poor Malays, that's rising. Rapid urbanization has resulted in urban poor and urban malnutrition. That data has also seen that. Sabah and Sarawak, in terms of the political dynamics, they are having that insatiable appetite right now for growth and might want to leave the shenanigans of the Peninsula Malaysia behind and go ahead. And then, of course, the ramifications of federalism might be brought into question. And energy conversations are also being put in place. So there's a few things that are put in place here, and its base seems to be silver bullet that might resolve some of the issues. Is this something that must be approached really well? And if so, what are the kind of the top 3 or top 5 of your wish list?
Yeah, I think on the needs base as well, right? We really could do with a lot more clarity and a lot more courage to actually articulate it. See, I come back to that phrase, right? Help the poor regardless of race.
Yeah.
I'm not opposed to that. I mean, that's fine to say it, but the fact, it's unfortunate that we kind of stop at that and we still cleave to that as the assurance given to Malaysians, especially non-Malays, that the system looks out for you. Where need-based policies especially apply, and need-based here, I see them as, more like a subset of policies that are safeguarding universal basic welfare, right? And that is very wide. It would apply to public health. It will apply to minimum wage. It would apply to basic schooling. These are the ones that you can see are and to remind people that these are the kind of provisions that are part of, right, the government's providing on the basis of rights, on the basis of equality. We can say with a bit more confidence where there is equality. I think there seems to be a certain diffidence about talking about equality, because that seems to, we fear maybe that it opens up a bit of a can of worms. But if we can specify a bit more and help people to see where equality is a principle, a fundamental principle, and also a reality, again, through these kind of the social protection, right, that, is provided to all. Not just about helping the poor, but helping many in, who are in the middle class, or even all of society. There's a lot more that can be done. And I think that we can extend that as well, right, in terms of making the federal system, operate more effectively, more equitably in delivering, public goods, in delivering basic needs.
Final word. This year, what are you going to be doing, focusing a lot more?
Well, there's a project that will be unpacking, this issue of what we are framing as group-based policies more broadly, which will
Are you going to be spending more
involve-
time in Malaysia? Are you going to be spending more time in Malaysia then?
I will be back and forth, yeah, as long as people still want to see me. I still want
I still want to see you. Why not?
Yeah. So it's making the case that we kind of rethink and relook at this, not just zoom in on the way that it gets very polarized, right? Where it's just about Bumiputera policy, then it's about whether you're for or against.
Yes, this binary kind of thing is not helping anybody.
Because there is a policy domain where it has policies for Bumiputera, for India, and for Orang Asli, and it can be gender-based as well for women. So there is a cohesion to that. There are definitely tensions, right? But our starting point, I think, is more productive if we approach it that way, and then we can really grapple and we can debate, right? Rather than you just kind of draw a line in the sand and then it's you versus me.
If I were to ask you, like, a rather not polarized, binary question, are we heading in the right direction as opposed to, say, 3 years ago, 5 years ago, versus are we going in the wrong direction? Where would you say we're heading? Wrong direction, right direction? Remember, Malaysia was not like this, like just 5 years ago.
Marginally right, I suppose.
Okay, so there you go. We're off to a good start. That was Dr. Lee Hock An, the Senior Fellow, as well as the Coordinator for the Malaysia Studies at the ICS Yusof Ishak Institute in Singapore. Here in town for a variety of reasons. One, of course, is the upcoming talk with the World Bank and the Ministry of Economy that is happening at Sana Kijang on the 5th of February. Until then, thanks very much, Hock An, and thank you for coming over.
Thank you so much.
That was fun and scary.
Assalamualaikum. Assalamualaikum Kedah. 8 Februari ini, semua dijemput datang beramai-ramai ke Masjid Madad untuk mengimarahkan tazkirah malam Jumaat dengan Alif Sata.
Semoga mendapat ilmu yang bermanfaat
dan asatizah yang penuh inspirasi. Selebriti kegemaran akan menyertai anda untuk beramal mulia. Alhamdulillah. Indahnya lain macam bila berkongsi rezeki. Debaran semakin terasa. JDT memanfaatkan sepenuhnya peluang. Cantik! Satu kesilapan mampu memusnahkan segalanya. Tekanan semakin memuncak. Sang gegasi kini berjuang ke pusingan seterusnya. That was unstoppable. AFC Champions League Elite secara langsung di Astro.
tumpuan kepada usaha. Seperti yang saya sebut pada hari Senin lepas 4 hari bulan di Dewan ini untuk meningkatkan perdagangan dan juga pelaburan intra-ASEAN yang masih lagi amat rendah. Tak sampai 25% pun. Dia punya peluang dan ruang untuk kita meningkatkan perdagangan dan pelaburan sesama negara ASEAN ini amat besar dan kita boleh manfaatkan ini. Jadi Tok Ketua, ini termasuk kita menerajui usaha untuk menaik taraf perjanjian-perjanjian perdagangan barangan ASEAN, misalnya A3, dan perjanjian rangka kerja ekonomi digital ASEAN ataupun DIFA, di mana kedua-dua mereka